I watched the doorbell camera footage with a cold, hollow realization that the woman who gave me life was now actively trying to destroy mine. Standing in my foyer, my fingers trembled slightly as I refreshed the feed on my phone. 10:12 a.m., the timestamp sat in the corner like a ticking bomb. On the screen, a woman in a perfectly pressed floral coat, a woman I used to call Mom, stepped onto my porch. She wasn't there to drop off cookies. She looked over her shoulder, a sharp, predatory glint in her eyes, and placed a small plastic bag filled with white powder and discarded needles behind my hydrangea planter. 2 minutes later, according to the official intake form I would soon see, a report was filed with Child Protective Services. Julian Vane used to tell me that the law is a weapon, and it's only as effective as the person wielding it. I never thought my own mother would learn that lesson so well. By 11:00 a.m., the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a family member. It was the state. I opened the door to see 2 CPS workers, their faces set in that practiced mask of neutral concern. Behind them, I could see Julian Vane's sleek black sedan idling at the curb. He wasn't just my mother's attorney, he was the architect of this nightmare. He knew that for a high-profile litigator like Catalin Moore, a neglect charge wasn't just a family matter, it was professional suicide. Voice 1 started screaming inside me. Panic, throw them out, hide the evidence she planted. If they see that bag, they'll take your son. That loud, primal survival instinct wanted me to react with rage and fear. It wanted me to play the role of the unstable mother Julian had surely described in the report. But then, I heard voice 2. The quieter, deeper voice of my inner truth. It told me to stay still. It reminded me that I had already taken the nail out of my head months ago when I cut ties with my mother's toxic influence. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I was a 38-year-old attorney who dealt in facts, not emotions. "Please, come in," I said, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of the terror clawing at my throat. I've been expecting a visit, though perhaps not under these specific, manufactured circumstances. They stepped into my living room, clipboards ready. They spoke of anonymous tips, substance abuse, and unsafe environments. They looked at my organized home, my son's drawings on the fridge, and my medication cabinet. I didn't hedge. I didn't get defensive. I followed the energy of the truth. I showed them my valid prescriptions, my stocked pantry, and then I invited them to my laptop. "Before you interview my son," I said, looking the lead investigator in the eye, "I think you should see what happened on my porch at 10:12 this morning." I hit play. We watched in silence as the grandmother of my child staged a crime scene on my doorstep. I watched the investigator's expressions shift from suspicion to shock. The energy in the room changed. The survival voice was silenced by the cold, hard reality of documented evidence. Julian Vane had taught me how to win in a courtroom, but he forgot that I had a doorbell camera. I wasn't just going to defend my home, I was going all in to dismantle the lies that put my son at risk. This was no longer just a CPS visit. This was the opening statement in the fight for my life. The CPS investigators, a man named Henderson and a woman named Sarah, sat on my gray velvet sofa, their eyes fixed on the loop of my doorbell camera footage. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I stood by the window, my hazel eyes scanning the street. The black sedan was gone. Julian Vane was many things, but he wasn't a fool. He knew when a trap had failed to spring. "Ms. Moore," Sarah said, finally looking up. Her voice had lost its administrative edge. "This video is quite damning. You're telling us this is your mother?" "It was," I replied, the word feeling like a stone in my throat. "But the woman you see there is currently a weapon being used by Julian Vane. She didn't just plant those needles for a family feud. She did it to initiate a state-sanctioned removal of my son." Voice 1, my inner critic, was pacing the floors of my mind. "Even with the video, they have to investigate," it hissed. "They're in your house. They've seen your life. What if they find a reason to stay? What if Julian has a backup plan?" This survival instinct was trying to keep me small, trying to make me apologize for a mess I didn't create. But I remembered the first promise, take the nail out of your head. My mother and Julian were the nail. I had to stop treating this like a family tragedy and start treating it like a tactical assault. "I understand your protocol," I said, stepping toward them. "You need to see the house. You need to speak to my son. I'm not going to stop you. In fact, I'm going to provide you with everything you need to close this file as malicious and unfounded before the sun sets." I led them through the house. I opened the pantry to show it stocked with healthy food. I showed them the medication lockbox where I kept my migraine prescriptions, logged and accounted for. I followed the energy of the facts, not the emotion of the betrayal. Willpower would have had me screaming at them to get out of my home, but energy, the language of the soul, told me that cooperation was the fastest route to their exit. When they asked to interview my 8-year-old son, Leo, privately, my heart skipped. My survival voice screamed, "Don't let them near him. They'll twist his words." But I took a deep breath. I knew my son. I knew the environment I had built for him. "Leo is in his playroom," I said, my voice gritty but calm. "He's a bright kid. He knows the difference between a secret and a lie. Go ahead." I waited in the kitchen, my knuckles white as I gripped the counter. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I thought about the 9 lives exercise. In one life, I was a victim, crying on the floor while they escorted my son to a car. In another, I was a fugitive, running from a system Julian had rigged. But in the life I was standing in, I was the architect of my own defense. I was the woman who had documented every interaction, saved every text, and installed the cameras Julian forgot to check. Henderson and Sarah emerged from the playroom. Leo followed them, holding a Lego spaceship. He looked at me, gave a small thumbs up, and went back to his bricks. "He's a well-adjusted boy, Catalin," Henderson said, closing his notebook. He spoke very highly of his routine. And frankly, he mentioned that Grandma hasn't been allowed over because she makes Mommy's head hurt. "It seems your boundaries were already in place." "They were," I said, but apparently boundaries weren't enough. Just as the investigators were preparing their departure paperwork, a loud, rhythmic banging echoed through the front door. I didn't need to look at the camera to know who it was. The escalation had begun. I opened the door just enough for the chain to catch. My mother stood there, her face a mask of feigned maternal panic. "Catalin, oh thank God, I saw the CPS cars. Are you okay? Did they find the things I was worried about?" She was performing for the investigators. She didn't realize they were standing right behind the door. "Step back, Evelyn," I said, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen. "Don't you Evelyn me. I'm trying to save my grandson from this filth," she shrieked, her eyes darting toward the investigators. "Officers, you have to help. She's dangerous. She's hiding men in there. She's—" "Ma'am," Henderson stepped forward, opening the door fully. "We've seen the video." My mother froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and withered in her expensive floral coat. The survival voice in her head must have been screaming, but for me, it was silent. I didn't feel the need to argue. I didn't feel the need to cry. I had followed the energy of the truth, and it had led me to this moment of absolute clarity. "You staged evidence, Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice stern. "In this state, filing a malicious CPS report is a crime. Staging physical evidence to support it is a felony. I suggest you leave this property immediately before we call the police to handle the transition." "This isn't over," my mother hissed, looking at me with a hatred that finally stripped away the last of my childhood illusions. "Julian told me you'd have a trick. He told me you'd try to lie your way out." "Julian isn't here to save you, Mom," I said, using the title for the very last time. "And I'm not lying, I'm documenting." She stumbled back as Henderson reached for his radio. I watched her retreat down the driveway, a small, bitter woman who had tried to weaponize a system meant to protect children. "We're labeling this case as malicious," Henderson told me as they walked to their car. "We'll be filing a report with the district attorney's office regarding the grandmother. But Catalin, be careful. People who go to these lengths don't usually stop because they got caught once." "I know," I said, looking toward the street where the black sedan had been, "but they've never played against someone who has nothing left to lose but the truth." I closed the door and locked it. The house was quiet again, but the energy was different. I had survived the first wave. But as I looked at the clock, 12:45 p.m., I realized the day was only half over. Julian Vane had more than one weapon in his arsenal, and the next one was already aimed at my son's school. The energy in the house didn't settle after the CPS investigators left. It condensed. I knew Julian Vane. He didn't build his reputation on a single, clumsy play. The false report and the staged needles were the distraction, the move that was supposed to keep me pinned down at home, defensive and occupied. While I was proving my sanity to the state, he was moving on the one thing that truly mattered, my son's security at school. I grabbed my keys and my phone. My voice one was back, humming a low frequency of dread. "You're too late," it whispered. "He's already 5 steps ahead. He's been in the game longer than you've been alive." I pushed the voice aside. To live at full power, I couldn't just react to Julian's moves, I had to anticipate the language of his corruption. I called the school as I backed out of the driveway. "This is Catalin Moore. I'm 10 minutes away. I need you to confirm that Leo Moore is in his classroom and that no one, under any circumstances, is allowed to pick him up." The receptionist's voice was hesitant. "Ms. Moore, actually, we were just about to call you. A family services coordinator from the district office, Marianne Holt, is here with your mother. They have paperwork for a temporary guardianship transfer." The air left my lungs for a split second. A nail was being driven into the system itself. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was institutional rot. I hung up and hit the gas. Graham Weaver's second promise echoed in my mind. Follow your energy, not your passion. My passion for the legal system was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, calculating energy. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. I knew how these portals worked. I knew that for Marianne Holt to have that paperwork, someone had to have bypassed my parental credentials in the district's backend. When I skidded into the school parking lot, I didn't go to the front office like a frantic parent. I went to the side entrance where I knew the security cameras had the best angle of the lobby. I walked in, my hazel eyes sharp, my expression a mask of lethal professional calm. In the lobby, the scene was exactly as I'd feared. My mother was there, clutching a designer handbag, looking every bit the concerned grandmother. Standing next to her was a woman in a beige pantsuit, Marianne Holt. She was holding a manila folder, speaking to the school principal, Mrs. Gable. "I'm sorry, Catalin," Mrs. Gable said as I approached, her silver hair shimmering under the fluorescent lights. "But Ms. Holt here has a court-ordered emergency guardianship directive. It was updated in the system just 20 minutes ago." "Show me the order," I said, my voice gritty and resonant. I didn't look at my mother. I looked straight at Marianne Holt. Holt flinched. She was a mid-level bureaucrat, a cog in the machine that Julian Vane usually greased with donations to district foundations. "It's all here, Ms. Moore. The system reflects a password reset and a status update from the administrative portal." I reached out and took the folder. The order was a joke, a forged document with a digital signature that looked like a blurred photocopy of Judge Miller's seal. But the system change, that was real. That was the nail Julian had used to bypass the locks on my life. "Principal Gable," I said, turning to the older woman, "I want you to look at my phone." I pulled up the logs from my own parental portal. At 10:21 a.m., while I was at home with CPS investigators, my account password was reset from a district staff IP address. Not my computer, not my phone, a district account. Specifically, the account assigned to Marianne Holt. The energy in the room shifted. Holt's face turned a sickly shade of gray. "You used your back-end admin access to override my parental rights," I said, stepping closer to her. "You did this at the request of Julian Vane, and you did it while knowing that a fraudulent report had been filed against me just minutes prior." Voice 1 tried to tell me I was overreaching. "She's a district official, Catalin. You can't talk to her like that. You'll be blacklisted from the school." I silenced the critic. I was going all in. I wasn't just defending Leo. I was exposing the wireframe of Julian's influence. I was told there was an emergency," Holt stammered. "The grandmother provided the documentation." "The grandmother provided a lie," I countered. "And you provided the keys to the kingdom. Principal Gable, I am the only authorized parent on record. If that child leaves this school with anyone else, I will not only sue this district into the Stone Age, but I will personally ensure that every person in this lobby is named as a co-conspirator in a kidnapping." Mrs. Gable looked from the forged paper to my mother, and then to the shaking Marianne Holt. She was a woman of integrity, a supporting presence like Judge Miller, and she could smell the rot. "Security," Mrs. Gable said into her radio. "Please escort Ms. Holt and this lady out of the building, and call the district superintendent's office. We have a serious breach of portal security." My mother began to shriek, the same high-pitched, manic sound from the porch. "Catalin, you're unstable, you're a drug addict. The report says so." "The report is unfounded, Evelyn," I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "And the needles you planted are currently being dusted for your fingerprints by the police." The look of pure, unadulterated fear that crossed my mother's face was the first moment of peace I'd had all day. She realized she wasn't playing a game anymore. She was in the arena with a woman who had stopped being her daughter and had started being her prosecutor. As the security guards led them away, I stood in the center of the lobby. My heart was racing, but my hands were steady. I had followed the energy through the digital maze and blocked Julian's path to my son. I had pulled the nail of administrative corruption out of the school system. But as I watched them disappear through the glass doors, I saw the black sedan again. It was parked at the far end of the lot. Julian Vane was sitting in the back seat, his silhouette dark against the tinted glass. He wasn't leaving. He was watching. He knew I had won this round, but he also knew I was exhausted. He was betting on my willpower running out. He didn't understand that I wasn't using willpower. I was using a regenerative energy that grew every time I spoke the truth. I walked to the office window and looked out at him. I raised my phone and took a photo of his license plate. I wasn't hedging. I wasn't waiting for the right moment. I was documenting the predator. "Mrs. Gable," I said, turning back to the principal. "I need a copy of the login logs from 10:21 a.m. We're going to need them for the grand jury." I had gone all in. The battle for my home was won. The battle for the school was won. Now, it was time to take the fight to the tower where Julian Vane thought he was safe. The energy of the morning had shifted from defensive survival to a cold, calculated offensive. I watched from the school's glass doors as Julian Vane's black sedan pulled away, merging into the gray flow of the city traffic. He thought he was retreating to the safety of his high-rise tower, but he didn't realize I had already begun dismantling the foundation beneath him. I sat in my car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Voice 1 was frantic now. "You've won the day, Catalin. Stop here. You saved your son, you cleared your name with CPS. If you go after Julian now, he'll burn everything you have left. He has friends in the DA's office. He has judges on his payroll." This inner critic was the loudest it had been all day, screaming for me to take the win and hide. But I closed my eyes and reached for voice 2. This voice didn't speak in fears. It spoke in the language of energy. I felt the surge of power that came from the documentation in my passenger seat, the screenshots of the unauthorized portal reset, the video of the staged evidence, and the recorded admission from Marianne Holt. The energy wasn't in the safety. It was in the pursuit of justice. I didn't go home. I followed the energy toward the one person who could turn these fragmented pieces of evidence into a legal cage for Julian Vane, Judge Harold Miller. Judge Miller was a silver-haired sentinel of the old guard. He had a wise, weary presence and a reputation for being the only man in the district Julian couldn't buy. I had clerked for him a decade ago, before the nail of corporate ambition had driven me into Vane's firm. I knew that if I wanted to survive the night, I had to move from the streets into the chambers of the law. I arrived at the courthouse just as the evening shadows were stretching across the stone pillars. I didn't have an appointment, but the clerk recognized me. Minutes later, I was standing in Miller's private chambers, the smell of old leather and law books providing a momentary sanctuary from the chaos outside. "Catalin," Miller said, looking up from a heavy leather-bound volume. His silver hair caught the dim lamplight. "You look like you've been through a war. Julian told me you were taking a sabbatical for health reasons." "Julian lied, Your Honor," I said, my voice gritty and resonant. I placed the manila folder on his desk. "He didn't just lie to you. He used the state's child protective services and the school district's administrative systems to attempt a kidnapping under the color of law." I laid it all out. I showed him the timeline, the 10:12 a.m. video, the 10:14 a.m. report, and the 10:21 a.m. portal breach. I explained how Marianne Holt, a district official, had bypassed my parental rights to hand my son over to a woman who had just planted drug paraphernalia on my porch. As Miller reviewed the evidence, his wise expression darkened. The silence in the room was absolute. This was the second promise in action: follow your energy. I wasn't just a mother fighting for her child. I was a lawyer presenting a RICO-level case of institutional corruption. "He used the portal," Miller whispered, more to himself than to me. "He went after the school's back-end access. That's a federal wire fraud violation, Catalin, not just a family dispute." "He thought I wouldn't check the logs," I said. "He thought I was too busy being unstable to document the fingerprints he left on the digital trail." Voice 1 tried to interrupt. "Miller won't help you. He's too old. He won't risk his reputation against Vane and Associates." But I pushed through. I was going all in. "Your Honor, I'm not just here for an order of protection," I said, leaning over the desk, my hazel eyes locking onto his. "I'm here because the system Julian Vane is using to destroy me is the same system you've spent 40 years protecting. If a district official can reset a parent's password to facilitate a false guardianship transfer, then no family in this city is safe. I need a no trespass order for my home and my son's school, but more importantly, I need a court-ordered preservation of the district's server logs before Julian has them wiped." Miller sat back, his fingers steepled. He looked at me, seeing the resilient, gritty woman I had become. You realize that if I sign this, Julian will know it was you. He will move from the shadows into a full-scale assault. He's already at my door, Your Honor, I replied. I'd rather meet him in the light of your courtroom than in the dark of my driveway. Miller nodded slowly. He pulled a fresh sheet of stationery and began to write. The scratching of his pen was the sound of the tide turning. He wasn't just giving me a piece of paper, he was giving me a shield. I'm issuing the no trespass orders immediately, Miller said. And I'm sending a marshal to the school district office tonight to seize the server logs. Catalin, you've pulled a very dangerous thread. Julian isn't going to just go away. He's going to try to drive the nail back in harder than before. Let him try, I said. I've stopped following the voice of fear. I'm following the energy of the truth now. I walked out of the courthouse with the signed orders in my hand. The night air was cold, but for the first time all day, I felt warm. I had moved from the getting unstuck phase into going all in. I had successfully engaged the highest level of the legal framework to protect my son. But as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. A single photo. My son Leo, through the window of his classroom earlier that afternoon, with a red crosshairs superimposed over the glass. The message read, "Documentation works both ways, Catalin. Stop now, or the next report won't be false." My heart hammered against my ribs. The survival voice screamed for me to vomit, to cry, to surrender. But I didn't. I looked at the photo, then at the courthouse I had just exited. I took a screenshot of the threat, attached it to an email to Judge Miller's clerk, and CC'd the local police captain. Julian thought he was intimidating a victim. He didn't realize he was providing more evidence to a prosecutor. I was no longer afraid. I was living at full power. And I was coming for his empire. The threat on my phone was a declaration of war, but it was also Julian's first mistake. By sending that photo, he had moved from the shadows of systemic manipulation into the light of criminal intimidation. He thought the image of Leo in crosshairs would break me. He didn't realize it had only simplified my existence. Voice 1, the critic, tried to stage a coup. "He's threatening your child," it screamed. "Run, take the boy and leave the state." This survival instinct was clawing at the walls of my chest, demanding I choose safety. But I remembered the second promise: follow your energy, not your passion. My passion was to be safe, but my energy was in the counterattack. I drove straight to the police precinct. I didn't walk in as a panicked mother. I walked in as a seasoned litigator with a stack of admissible evidence. Within 20 minutes, I was in a fluorescent lit interview room with Detective Vance, a man who looked like he'd seen too many city winters. "Julian Vane," Vance muttered, looking at the photo of Leo on my screen. "He's a ghost in the city, Ms. Moore. We all know what he does, but he never leaves a footprint." "He just did," I said, my voice gritty and resonant. The metadata on this photo shows it was taken from a device within 50 yards of the school, and the timestamp. 1:15 p.m. exactly when the black sedan I reported earlier was seen in the parking lot. I have the license plate. I have the no trespass order signed by Judge Miller 2 hours ago. Now, I want you to trace the burner phone that sent this. I sat there, my hazel eyes fixed on the detective's coffee cup. I felt a strange, regenerative power. Willpower is a limited resource. It's what you use to endure a life you hate. But energy is abundant when you align with your true self. I was finally using my legal mind for the one thing that mattered. Vance stepped out to coordinate with the cyber crimes unit. Left alone in the quiet room, I realized that the nail Julian had driven into my life was his belief that I was predictable. He thought my fear for Leo would make me a victim. He didn't understand that for a woman living at full power, fear isn't a wall, it's fuel. An hour later, Vance returned. He looked different, sharper. The IP address used to reset your school portal password. It wasn't just Marianne Holt's office. It was a remote login from an encrypted server registered to Vane and Associates' secondary office. We've got him on a direct link to the portal breach. The energy in my veins turned to ice. And the phone? The photo was sent from a burner, but it pinged off the tower nearest to Julian's penthouse 10 minutes after the school visit. He didn't even bother to leave the building. "He's arrogant, Catalin. He thinks he's untouchable." "He's not," I said. "He's just never been hunted by someone who knows his own playbook." I spent the rest of the night going all in. I didn't go home to hide. I checked into a secure hotel, then I spent 6 hours drafting a civil RICO complaint. I wasn't just suing for a false CPS report. I was suing for a decade of systemic corruption. I named every district official, every consultant, and every private investigator Julian had on his payroll. I attached the doorbell footage of my mother, the login logs from the school, and the crosshair photo. By 4:00 a.m., I hit send on a digital filing to the federal court. I wasn't waiting for the right moment. The right moment was the second Julian Vane thought he could threaten my son and get away with it. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt different. I wasn't the disgruntled employee anymore. I was the architect of a reckoning. I arrived at the school district's main office at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I didn't ask for a meeting. I walked past the reception desk and straight toward the director of family services. Security tried to block me, but I held up Judge Miller's order and the copy of the federal filing. "Marianne Holt is being terminated today," I told the director, my voice steady and lethal. "And if you don't provide the internal audit of every password reset performed by her account in the last 90 days, your name will be the first one added to the amended section of this RICO suit." The director blanched. He looked at the paperwork, then at my hazel eyes, which were hard as diamonds. He saw the second voice in action, the version of me that was no longer asking for permission to exist. "She's already on administrative leave, Ms. Moore," he stammered. "We're conducting an internal investigation." "Investigation is over," I said. "Here are the logs proving the Vane server access. You have 1 hour to issue a formal statement to the school board, or the press gets the files." I walked out of the building, the cold morning air hitting my face like a benediction. I had followed the energy through the institutional rot and found the weak point. But as I reached my car, my mother was waiting. She looked haggard, her floral coat wrinkled, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. "Catalin, stop," she cried, grabbing my arm. "Julian is furious. He said if you don't drop the suit, he'll release the other files. The ones from your first year at the firm. He says he'll ruin you." I looked at her, this woman who had staged needles on my porch to steal my child. I felt a profound sense of pity, but no fear. "Tell Julian that I've already pulled the nail out, Mom," I said, gently but firmly removing her hand from my arm. "I don't care about my reputation anymore. I only care about the truth. And the truth is, I'm the one who's going to ruin him." "He'll kill you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He already tried to kill my soul for 15 years, I replied, starting my engine. "He failed. Now it's my turn." I drove away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk. I was heading to the U.S. Attorney's office. I wasn't hedging. I wasn't protecting my career. I was going all in, and for the first time in my 38 years, I felt like I was finally, truly alive. The energy of the fight had moved beyond my home and the school hallways. It was now vibrating through the very marble of the city's legal infrastructure. By 2:00 p.m., the U.S. Attorney's office was a hive of activity. Because I had followed the energy of the digital trail instead of the passion of my own outrage, I had handed them a map. I sat in the high-ceilinged office of the Assistant U.S. Attorney, a woman who didn't care about Julian Vane's social standing. She only cared about the nail I had just handed her, the evidence of a coordinated attack on a private citizen using state and district resources. Voice One was making a final, desperate stand in my head. "You're a pariah now," it jeered. "Even if he goes down, you've broken the unspoken code. No law firm will ever touch you. You've traded your career for a moral victory." This voice was the echo of my survival instinct, trying to tell me that a life without Julian's approval was a life without value. But I looked at the 9 lives exercise I had written in my head. In 8 of those lives, I surrendered to Julian and lived in fear. In the 9th life, the one I was currently inhabiting, I was free. The discomfort was real, the financial ruin was looming, but the energy was regenerative. I wasn't using willpower to stay awake anymore. The truth was keeping me energized. "The server logs from the school district are a match, Catalin," the AUSA said, closing her file. "The remote login used to bypass your parental portal originated from a VPN tied to Vane and Associates Litigation Support Department. We're moving for a federal search warrant for their main servers. And we're taking Marianne Holt into custody for questioning." "It's not just Holt," I said, my voice gritty and resonant. "It's the grandmother. She was the one who provided the physical evidence to justify the intervention. She was the trigger. The police have already issued a warrant for your mother's arrest for filing a false report and felony evidence tampering," she replied. "But there's a catch. Julian has filed an emergency motion to seal all records related to this case, claiming national security interests due to his firm's work with the Department of Defense. He's trying to bury the documentation before it becomes public. This was Julian's last move, the secrecy seal. He wanted to keep the fight in the dark where he was strongest. He wants a secret war, I said, my hazel eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp realization. So let's give him the light. I spent the next 4 hours going all in. I didn't wait for the court to rule on the seal. I called a press conference on the courthouse steps. I didn't hire a PR firm. I didn't prepare a polished statement. I stood there, a 38-year-old mother who had been pushed to the edge, and I told the city the truth. I showed the doorbell video of my mother. I showed the crosshair photo of my son. I explained how the school's admin portal, the system that protects every child in the district, had been weaponized by a private law firm to facilitate a kidnapping. Julian Vane thinks he owns the silence of the city, I told the bank of cameras, my voice steady and echoing against the stone pillars. He thinks he can drive a nail into any family that dares to stand up to him. But documentation is the light that kills the ghosts. I am not a victim. I am a witness. And I am not going away. The energy of that moment was like nothing I had ever felt. It wasn't the runner's high I'd experienced in the Hamptons. It was the high of total alignment. I wasn't hedging my words. I wasn't protecting my brand. I was a woman at full power, protecting her child and her integrity. By evening, the city was in an uproar. The school district board was forced to hold an emergency session. Marianne Holt, facing felony charges, began to talk. She admitted that Julian hadn't just asked for the password reset, he had paid off her mortgage in exchange for administrative favors over the last 3 years. The machine was breaking. The nail was being pulled out of the city's heart, one witness at a time. I returned to my hotel room to find Leo watching cartoons. He looked up and smiled, oblivious to the war I was waging for his future. I hugged him, and for the first time in years, the survival voice was silent. There was no fear, only a deep, abiding sense of purpose. But at midnight, there was a knock on the door. Not a loud, aggressive bang, but a soft, rhythmic tap. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't Julian. It was his lead investigator, a man I'd seen in the black sedan. I didn't open the door. I took out my phone and started recording. The no trespass order is in effect. If you're still here in 60 seconds, the U.S. Marshals will be the ones talking to you. Julian wants to talk, Catalin, the man said through the door. He's offering a settlement, 8 figures, a full retraction of the CPS report, a new house in any country you choose. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and hand over the server logs you seized. Tell Julian that I've already made my promises, I said, my voice cold and gritty. I follow my energy now, not his money, and my energy is telling me that he's terrified. He's offering me a new cage because he knows his current one is about to be locked from the outside. You'll never work again, Moore, he hissed. I've never worked a day in my life until today, I replied. Now, leave. I watched him walk down the hallway on the security monitor. I felt an abundance of strength. I had turned down the safety of $10 million because I knew that safety was just another nail. I was going all in on the trial. I was going all in on the truth. I sat down at the small desk in the room and began drafting my testimony for the grand jury. I wasn't tired. I wasn't anxious. I was living at full power. Julian Vane had tried to use the law to steal my child, and in doing so, he had given me the keys to destroy his empire. Tomorrow, the final phase would begin, not because the right moment had arrived, but because I had stopped waiting for it. The resolution didn't come with a roar. It came with the quiet, heavy sound of a closing cell door. I stood in the back of the courtroom as the grand jury's indictment was read aloud. Julian Vane, the man who had spent 30 years architecting the silence of the city, was led out in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, just a man in an expensive suit whose nail of power had finally been pulled out by the roots. As he passed me, his cold blue eyes tried to find that old flicker of fear in mine. He found nothing but the calm, gritty reflection of a woman who was finally living at full power. My mother's fate was a different kind of tragedy. She was issued a permanent no trespass order and faced heavy citations for her role in the false reporting and evidence tampering. She had tried to weaponize the system to claim control, but she had only succeeded in losing the one thing that was actually real, her family. Voice 1, the old critic, occasionally tries to whisper that I am a pariah in the corporate legal world, but that voice has no power over me now. I realized that the safety Julian offered was a cage, and the discomfort I faced was simply the sensation of freedom. Graham Weaver's 3 promises had saved me. I had taken the nail out of my head by admitting I was stuck. I had followed my energy through the digital maze of school portals and police precincts. And I had gone all in, refusing the 8-figure bribe to protect a truth that wasn't for sale. Today, I don't work in a mahogany tower. I work in a small, sunlight-filled office near Leo's school. I don't defend titans, I defend the families that titans try to crush. My license is intact, my son is safe, and for the first time in my 38 years, I am not reacting to the world. I am creating it. I've learned that life isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about documenting the truth while the wind is blowing and trusting that your second voice will lead you home. If you are listening to this and you feel that pressure in your chest, that knowing that you are meant for more than the cage you are in, stop waiting. Stop hedging. The right moment is right now. Follow your energy. Speak your truth. Go all in. Subscribe for more stories on how to handle malicious reporting, protect your family, and live at full power.